Hi, everyone. I'm Chris, one of the hosts of the Coaching Life podcast, and this is a bonus episode that we're going to bring to you today. A few years ago, I wrote a book titled Building Champions, and in that book, one of the chapters that I wrote was a chapter that was titled A Culture of Mistake Avoidance. And I want to talk about that just for a second. And that's what Pat and I are going to have some bonus episodes now and then where you just kind of get an extra podcast in your feed throughout the week. And they're just going to be really short, brief conversations about one particular point. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this one today is because I was watching an interview with Coach Frank Solich of the Ohio University Bobcats. He's the head football coach. And it was an interview on the Bobcat Sports Showcase. And they asked him a question about having young players and whether or not he was prepared for them to make mistakes. And I just want to play one of the things that Coach Solich said in that particular interview, and then we're going to talk about it just for a few minutes. Here's what Coach Solich said about players making mistakes.
I'm wanting them to play really good football. We'll expect that out of them. Now, will some mistakes be made? It's gonna happen. But we haven't built our program by just putting pressure on a player. If you make a mistake, you're out of there or you're done. That's not the way it works with us.
So, first thing I want to say is Pat's not actually with us in the studio today, but Pat is with us. He's on a phone call. We're actually Skyping with Pat. Say hi, Pat.
Hey, everyone.
All right, there he is. Good deal. So this actually does two things for us. It gives us a chance to test this remote interview process thing that we're wanting to do anyway. So I'm glad that you're able to be with us from afar, co-host.
Thanks, Coach.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
Yeah, buddy. Well, I want to talk about I want to talk about the Solich interview for a minute. One of the most valuable lessons I think that we can teach our kids, and this is just our kids in general, not just kids that play for us on our teams, but I think one of the most valuable lessons we can teach our kids is how to learn from their mistakes. And this begins, I think, by helping them to not become defeated whenever they make a mistake. And that point is actually huge for us coaches and us parents, because I think we have a lot of influence over whether or not our player is going to feel defeated when they make a mistake, or if they are going to be able to press beyond that initial disappointment, that initial discouragement, which we know always comes. It comes naturally because people are competitive, and when they're competitive, they're going to be upset that they make a mistake. But I think a real point of growth in a young athlete's development is to be able to press beyond that, recognize, okay, I'm upset that I just made a mistake, but then move beyond it and look at the circumstance as an opportunity to learn something about themselves so that they can minimize the chances that they're going to make that same mistake again.
They're learning.
Yeah, they're learning. It's not just dwelling, it's learning. I mean, how often do we see people focus so much on the mistake? When I say people, I'm not just talking about the kids. I'm talking about the coach. I'm talking about the parent. We put so much emphasis on the mistake that it seems like they can never move past it. And they don't have that presence of mind to realize I can learn from this. And as a result, what happens is they continue to make that same mistake again and again and again. But even worse, they end up making other mistakes because because they start playing less aggressively. They become real passive in the way they play. Rather than playing freely, they start playing in such a way that their mindset is more of don't make a mistake. Just don't make a mistake. And I'll tell you this, I want to make a statement, and I'm going to give you a chance to talk a little bit, Pat, but this is my introductory word to this. Whenever a kid is playing to not make a mistake, they will never play to their full potential.
Absolutely.
It is impossible for them to do so. I mean, because they have to hold back a little bit just to be sure that they don't make a mistake. I mean, they have to monitor themselves, so to speak. And so what's going to happen is you as a coach, you're only going to get so much out of them because they're having to hold back because they're so concerned about making a mistake. And the question I want to ask us coaches and us parents is, why are they so concerned about making mistakes? Why are they worried about it? And it's because we create that mindset in our kids. We create it by our words and we create it by our actions. And so that's kind of an overall summary, like a brief summary of this chapter that I wrote called A Culture of Mistake Avoidance. And I just want to talk about that for a few minutes.
Coach, I know you're not a big fan of using our podcast to try to sell your book, but if anyone's listening out, I'm not afraid to do it. So if anyone's listening out there and you have not read Building Champions by Chris Stewart, I highly recommend that you go grab you a copy. It's dirt cheap for the quality that you get out of it. And when I reviewed the book, I said I cried when I read it.
I cried when I wrote it. At some parts.
But in this chapter you're talking about, Coach, you give a list of what I'd call behaviors, and you say, do you find yourself doing this during your children's games or during the games that you coach? And it's just a list of different things, and after you read them, you say, if you said yes to one of these, you might be someone that is creating a culture of mistake avoidance. And I remember very, very clearly reading this, and it was just one after another. Yep, I do that. Yep. And it brings me back. I remember it before. This was a time before I read the book. There was a situation. I was coaching my oldest son, Jake. I think it was a fall ball season. He may have been 10 or 11 years old, and I don't even remember what he did wrong. And that's another point to make.
Yeah,
always remember that as we go through the sports youth sports life cycle that we are as athletes and as parents, as coaches, not only are we not going to remember what these mistakes are, but other people definitely aren't going to remember.
Exactly.
So they're very small things, but something happened. He didn't cover second base or whatever, and I basically stopped the game to yell at him.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a meeting. It was a from a dugout to second base scream. Yeah. Kind of, what are you doing? Get your head in the game. And after the game, my dad came up to me, and I knew he wasn't very happy, and he said you're too hard on Jake. And I said, I wasn't hearing that. I didn't want to hear that. And I said, no.
You're just thinking that's grandpa,
Yeah, exactly.
Taking up for grandson, right?
Sure. And I said our relationship's fine. He understands. He said, no, you don't get it. When you do stuff like that, you're embarrassing him. You're embarrassing him in front of a bunch of people, and you're making him afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah, making him timid to play.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want your kids to play timid.
No, absolutely not. And I still didn't hear it. I didn't want to. I was upset. It wasn't a great conversation. We kind of walked away from each other, agreeing to disagree. But the more I dwelled on it, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, he's right. And, my dad's a pretty simple man, but he's got a lot of common sense. And I went back to him. I said, I apologized to him. I said, you're right. And
that's great.
It was hard to hear that. But what I realized was, this was my dad seeing me, his son, make a mistake. And it was a form of modeling. We talk about that in other episodes. And he came to me and he talked to me about the mistake that I was making. And I went to Jake and I said, Jake, Grandpa Martin thinks that I'm too hard on you. And
immediately
Jake said, no, I'm fine. We're good. I understand. And I said, no,
because he's a competitor.
He gets it.
Yep.
And I said, no, you don't. He's right. He's right. I am. And I apologized to him. I said, I'm gonna commit myself to being a better parent, coach, just like you're committing yourself to be a better player.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that it's so easy as parents, even as coaches. I think, my personal experience, I'm harder on Jake. I'm harder on my kids, Jeremiah, than I am on other kids. It's just something that I do naturally.
Yep.
But we are missing golden opportunities in sports to teach our kids how to deal with things that they're going to experience in life. And you know what? We only get those opportunities when they fail or when they make a mistake.
Man, that's such a great point, Pat. One of the justifications I think that people will make about this very thing that we're talking about, a justification for a coach or a parent getting on their kids is whenever they have their child or one of their players come back at them and say, "No, it's okay. I want that. I need that." They say, "See, it's what they want," and they're a competitor, just like I said, they're a competitor, and so they need that. But it still, here's the problem though. Yeah, that's great when you have a kid that wants that coaching up, but it still makes them play. It doesn't change the fact that they are going to ultimately play to not make a mistake when your first knee-jerk reaction is to jump on them. And, because they don't necessarily, I don't think anybody really wants that. I think after the fact, Jake thought about it and went, "That's okay. I forgive you." It's not that big of a deal. But during it, you don't ever want somebody you don't really want that. You're not inviting that. I can't imagine anybody's inviting that into their lives, that kind of behavior. But I tell you, I actually have the book in my hand, Pat, and let's go ahead and let's read some of those. Because it's a simple little survey that if you were to ask yourself these questions, and it's a yes or no answer, how many of these would you say yes to, and how many would you say no to? Like number 1 says, when your player makes an error, are you quick to, when I say your player, that's either your child as a player or your player that you're coaching. When he or she makes an error, are you quick to correct him, coach him up immediately after the error is made while they're still on the field or the court? So like what you're talking about, they're shouting it from the dugout, right?
Right.
And for me, I answered yes to that one when I was a youth coach.
Ditto.
And
you know what? I still do it sometimes. I'm working through it. So,
Yep. Not perfect in these. Number 2, have you ever said these or similar words to your player? "Hey, don't walk this batter," or "You have to make your free throws," or "Do not fumble the football."
Yeah.
Right. And what do a couple of those statements have in common? They begin with the word "don't."
Right.
And so we immediately get in their mind thinking about what? Not an aggressive mindset toward playing the game, but a passive, a defensive mindset of don't do this. Don't do something.
Yes. Yeah. Great point.
I've done that.
Hold on to the football. Make your free throws.
Yeah. Exactly. Tell them what we want to do in a positive way, not what we don't want them to do. Number 3, do you react outwardly with words or grunts or moans or other physical gestures? Like for me, I would take my hat off and just put my head down and slap my hat on my knee or something like that whenever. And I know that my players saw that because later I had a couple of them tell me, "I saw that. I see what you do in the dugout. I hear your groans," and things like that. Basically doing anything that you can to show your displeasure whenever a big mistake or error is made. I mean, something that simple is noticed, and it causes it builds upon this culture of mistake avoidance. That okay, we're saying that mistakes disappoint us, and kids don't want to disappoint you, and so if mistakes disappoint us, and that's obvious in our behavior, then they're going to play to not make a mistake.
I'm being convicted all over again as we're going through this list.
Number 4, do you feel a need to give verbal coaching advice while your players are in the heat of the game, such as like I liken this to when a player's in the batter's box or when they're on the free throw line, and they're actually in that moment where they're about to do one of the hardest things there is to do, and that is to perform the task that is needed in that moment. The last thing that hopefully you prepared them before that moment in practice. You don't need to coach them right there. Yeah. And in doing so, what you're actually doing is you're putting doubt in their minds. I must not be ready for this because they still feel like they need to coach me up while I'm getting ready to swing at this pitch.
Good, great point. Yep.
And number 5. So far I've said yes to all 4 of these.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
Number 5. Do many of your players react negatively whenever they make a mistake? Do they put their head down, or perhaps demonstrate even worse behavior, such as slam or throw equipment? And I got to say that that's actually one of my biggest no-nos on any team that I coach. But But whenever you see a player do that, sometimes they're doing it because they know that they just really disappointed you, and they're probably going to come out of the game, or they're probably going to have repercussions for that. And so it's just a reaction for them. I think if you answer yes to a few of those questions, certainly if you answer yes to all of them, then there's no doubt that your team is functioning with a mistake avoidance mindset. And that's a tough way to play. It's a tough way to play. It's a tough way, it's hard, and I think it's hard to maintain a culture that's opposite of that, which would be playing, being okay with taking risks, being okay with realizing, okay, if I'm overly aggressive, I might make some mistakes. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason why it's hard to go into with that mindset is because we know that sometimes mistakes cause us to lose, right? Sure. And we don't want to lose, we want to win. But I still think that when we react like that, when mistakes are made, it's exactly what I just said. It's being reactive.
Yes.
It's not allowing players to work through mistakes. And when we allow them to work through mistakes, that's a proactive thing.
Absolutely.
But I guess we should say too, and you made a great point about the Coach Solich interview before we came on, hit the record button, Pat, and I'll let you make that point. But one thing we're definitely not saying here is that we are glad when people make mistakes, or that we want players to be happy about making mistakes, that they should look forward to making mistakes. We're just saying that there's a different mindset that they can have when they make them that helps them to realize, okay, this isn't the end of the world. It's not the end of my playing time, which you've got a lot of control over that, Coach. In fact, this is something that I can learn from, and it can actually make me a better player if I do learn from it.
Right.
But we're not saying that we are happy or that we're expecting them to make mistakes, are we?
No, absolutely not. I think it comes down to this, really. I think it comes down to focusing on the process over the result.
Absolutely.
In the interview, Coach Solich said, when my favorite part of the interview was the beginning, when the reporter asked him, are you prepared for the young players to make mistakes out there on the field? And his answer was no, I'm not prepared. And what Coach Solich was saying there was that they are prepared to go out and to play good football, right? That's what he was saying there.
Absolutely.
They went through the process. They're ready to go, and they can play good football. And then he went on to, to explain and describe that, their culture as a football program isn't about focusing on those mistakes. It's not about focusing on the result of a given play or result of a game or something like that. It's about the process.
Yeah.
And I know you talk about that a lot, but, anytime there's a mistake in a game, I think everyone goes to that, it's a result. Everyone goes straight to the result. This bad thing happened. But the result, a bad result can happen from a good process. As a matter of fact, it happens quite a bit in sports, and it happens an awful lot in baseball, right?
And in all of life.
and on the flip side of that, in baseball, especially softball, a bad process can sometimes result in some good results. Mm-hmm. Right? And so you have to evaluate the entire sequence of events that happens, not just the end result, but evaluate everything, the preparation, the mental approach, what the steps were, what the sequence was up to the time that the mistake or the failure, the loss happened. And you put all that together as part of the data and the information that you have to help be a better coach, to help your players be better players. And what I'm saying there is, it's a lot of information there to take in. It's probably not feasible to make the right decision or the right call on that information immediately after it happens.
In the heat of the moment. Yeah.
Right.
And that's kind of the point here, is I think Coach Solich was saying, no, we're not going to pull them out of the game. We're not going to tell them that they're done because they made a mistake. That's not the kind of culture we have here. We understand that that's probably that those will happen, but we're not expecting them to do that. Just because we understand they're going to happen doesn't mean that we are not expecting them to play to perfection. We want them, we prepared them to play to perfection, but we understand that that's likely not going to be the case. We're not going to play penalty free. If we do, fantastic. We're not going to play. Not everyone's going to make the right block or the right read. We understand that, but when that happens, we're going to learn from it and move on, and that's the only way to be successful. I think one of the things that mistake avoidance causes people to do is it causes them to settle for only doing things that they know they can do. Which
can't steal second base with your foot on first.
Exactly. So they're only going to go station to station in that same context, which means what's going to happen is they're rarely ever going to challenge themselves to do something that they cannot yet do. And how are we ever going to get better? By practicing things, trying to do things that we can't yet do. Otherwise, you just stay in cruise control, and that's exactly what mistake avoidance does. You play in cruise control. You only settle for focusing on the things that you know. I know I can do this. I know I have the ability to do this, and so that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to press beyond and try to do something more. I'm not going to try to get better.
Great point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to talk about that for a second because I loved it when I heard that. I actually retweeted it and mentioned it on my Twitter, and it reminded me of where I was when I wrote that chapter, and what kinds of things I was thinking and talking about, and the kinds of experiences that I had, and the kind of failures that I made, which is really the whole reason why I wrote it. It's the whole reason why you and I do this podcast, is because it's built a lot upon our own failures and our own mistakes, and ironically enough, we have learned from those things, and we want to help other people learn from them, which is the whole reason why we're doing this podcast. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I know one thing that we talked about wanting to provide people as far as information is the recruiting process, and what recruiters look at and what college baseball coaches look at. And there's a Twitter account out there, Keep Playing Baseball. And that's kind of what they do. They give advice and information about the recruiting process. But they tweeted something earlier today, and it says it's something to keep in mind. This fall, recruiters want to see you during times when you struggle and fail. All right, college coaches want to know how you respond when things aren't going your way. So it's another way to look at it. All these times that we see our kids fail, see our kids make mistakes, they're really just opportunities to grow.
Yeah.
Don't pass those opportunities up.
Yeah. And it begins with us, coaches. It begins with us, mom, dad. We have to be okay with that. We have to get better at that. I shouldn't say. I don't want to sound like I'm saying we have to be okay with mistakes. We have to learn how to use mistakes for our benefit.
Absolutely.
How to see a mistake and recognize something good can come out of this, and that's what the focus needs to be on. The same is true when I talk to people about complaining. One of the big things I hit upon when I do like leadership seminars and things like that is what would happen if you just decided to just not ever complain again about anything, and people confuse it with seeing something negative either in the workplace or in the world or whatever, and saying, well, so you're saying I shouldn't point that out? And I'm like, well, no, there's a difference between mindless complaining and being critical of something that needs to change, recognizing something that needs to change. And that difference comes in what you focus on. People who just complain all the time, they're just focusing on the object that they're complaining about. And there's never looking beyond that to see, okay, what's the solution? But someone who sees a problem says, okay, here's the problem. And that sounds like a complaint. But what happens is they immediately shift their mind from the problem and start looking to how we can create a solution so that this is no longer a problem. And I think that this is the same thing. We're talking about the same thing when we're talking about making mistakes. So many people can't focus beyond the mistake. They just keep focusing on the mistake. They keep harping on the mistake. They get in the car on the way home, and what do they talk about? The mistake, right? And so what happens is we never move beyond that. Our focus has got to move beyond it. Okay, yes, you made a mistake. Mistakes aren't good, but we can learn from the mistake. Let's look beyond it. How can you learn from it? How can you get better? How can you make sure that the next time you're in this situation, you're better prepared for it? So that maybe you'll make a mistake again, but you're going to be better prepared for it. So it's less likely that you will.
Yep. Otherwise, we're just getting very good at pointing out mistakes.
Yeah.
And helping nobody.
That's exactly right. It's just empty. So, well, cool. Thanks for coming on with me from 40 miles or so away.
Thanks for having me, Coach.
Yeah, you bet. Hope everybody enjoyed it.